Hi, good to see you. In his impeccable office with a panoramic view of the vibrant city below, Carlos sits in his leather chair with his gaze lost on the horizon. His thoughts travel through time, returning to a past that he tried unsuccessfully to leave behind years ago in a decision that would change the course of his life. Leaving Valeria, his girlfriend at the time, who was facing an unwanted pregnancy, justified his departure with the promise of a bright future in Europe, an opportunity that his father had gotten him, leaving Valeria with a painful choice ahead. Carlos, the meeting with the investors is in minutes, interrupted his secretary, bringing him back to reality. He nods, thanking her with a gesture, but his heart remains distant, caught in Valeria's memories. Later at home, after a lonely dinner, Carlos, as he comes across an old box of photographs and letters, he hesitates, but curiosity wins there. Among memories of simpler times, he finds a photo of Valeria. His eyes fill with tears, a rare emotion for a man who has built an armor around his heart. "Valeria, where are you now?" he murmurs to himself, the weight of loneliness pressing on his chest. He will have had the baby. There will be that night. Carlos barely sleeps, turning in bed while the ghost of the past torments him. In the morning, he makes a decision. You need to know what happened to Valeria and the baby, but where to start? Social media maybe, or it would be better to hire a detective. Your first step is to try to find her online. You spend hours searching, but Valeria seems to have disappeared without leaving a trace. Each fruitless search increases his determination. I need to find her, he decides. I need to know if she is okay. However, the real question that torments him is what he will do if he really finds her. What will he say to her after all this time? Carlos knows that the road ahead is uncertain, but one thing is Clara can no longer escape from the past. She needs to face the consequences of her decisions once and for all. Carlos, he is in front of his laptop, sending one last email before going to bed. He hires an ad detective to locate Valeria. It's time to right the wrongs of the past, he whispers in the darkness, a mix of hope and fear lurking in his heart. Carlos begins his day with renewed determination, but his attempts to find Valeria continue to be fruitless. Hours turn into days, and every clue he follows ends in a dead end. Frustration grows within him, but also a resilience he didn't know he possessed. Refuses to give up despite the obstacles. In contrast to the search, Valeria lives a quiet life, and Modesta works as a teacher in a small town, a job that allows her to be close to her son Vicente, who is now a curious and intelligent teenager. Valeria has raised Vicente alone, instilling in them respect and kindness, but he avoided the topic of his father, saying only that he was someone with whom they couldn't stay together. Vicente, now with years of age, is the image of resilience and unconditional love. He has inherited Valeria's expressive eyes, but there is something in the one who has always reminded Carlos of a memory that Ella keeps in her heart but has never shared with her son. On a quiet afternoon, while Valeria prepares dinner, Vicente approaches with a question that she has feared for years. "Mom, who is my dad? That you never talk about him." The simplicity of Vicente's question touched Valeria more deeply than she expected. She looks at her son, searching for the right words, but all she manages to say is, "He was a very special person, but our paths had to separate." Vicente nods, realizing that this is a delicate issue for his mother. He decides not to press any further. Meanwhile, Carlos receives the news that the detective he hired could not locate Valeria either. The information falls like a blow, and for a moment he feels tempted. However, when he looks at the photo of Valeria that he has on his desk, his determination strengthens. "I need to find her," he mutters, more to himself than to anyone else. Night falls, and Valeria sits next to Vicente watching a television program. While watching his son laugh, his heart is filled with love and gratitude for the life they have built together despite the adversity. However, deep down he knows that the truth about Vicente's past will still have to be faced by Carlos. On the other hand, he spends another restless night, turning in bed, consumed by the search and the memories of Valeria. He knows that the road ahead will be difficult, but the hope of finding Valeria again, and perhaps meeting the son he never knew he had, keeps him going. Departure. On a seemingly ordinary morning, destiny sets the stage for a long-awaited meeting. Carlos, on a business trip, arrives at the airport, his mind still occupied by the incessant search for Valeria, and the son he never met walks through the terminal, absorbed in his thoughts. barely noticing the crowd around them. Valeria, on the other hand, accompanied by Vicente, is also at the airport. They are on their way to a mathematics competition in which Vicente, now a bright and promising young man, has been invited. To participate is a journey that Valeria faces with a mix of pride and anxiety, knowing that opportunities like these are rare and valuable. The meeting occurs by chance at a moment when both are crossing the same busy hallway. Carlos, distracted, almost collides with Valeria when he looks up. And seeing who his heart jumps, Valeria can hardly believe that after so much time and effort she is there right in front of him. Valeria, equally surprised, Carlos's voice hesitates for a moment, so familiar and at the same time distant, transports her back to a past she has tried to leave behind. Carlos responds, unsure of how to feel at his side. Vicente watches the exchange of glances between the two, sensing the tension and surprise. She has never seen Carlos before, but something about that man calls her. Carlos, for his part, cannot look away from Vicente, seeing in the young man a reflection of himself. The airport, with its constant flow of people, seems to become silent around him. Carlos takes a step forward, trying to find the suitable words. I have been looking for you. Her voice begins, full of emotion. And who is this? She points to Vicente with curiosity, and esperanza shines in her eyes. Valeria takes a breath, preparing to respond, but is interrupted by Vicente's voice. I am Vicente, says the young man, extending his voice. Carlos automatically waves back, feeling an instantaneous and inexplicable connection. Before they can speak more, a boarding announcement is heard, reminding them of the world around them. Valeria looks at the clock and then at Carlos. We have to go, says her voice full of reluctance. But how can I find you again? Carlos asks, desperate not to lose the connection he has just found. Valeria, vacilla, fear and hope fighting in his heart, finally quickly writes his number on a piece of paper and hands it to Carlos. Call me, he says, before turning and heading towards the boarding gate with Vicente. In the days that followed the meeting at the airport, Carlos, she found in a whirlwind of emotions. The image of Valeria and the young Vicente did not leave her mind. Finally gathering courage, she decided to call the number that Valeria gave her. The phone rings 3 times before she answers, her voice wavering on the other end of the line. Valeria, can we meet? I need to talk to you, Carlos says, trying to remain calm after a brief pause. Valeria agrees to meet in a discreet cafeteria in the city, a place where they can talk without interruptions. When Carlos sees Valeria enters the cafeteria, her heart races. She seems the same. Although time has left its subtle marks, they exchange cautious greetings before sitting down. The initial silence between them is loaded with years of separation and unsaid words. Carlos is the first to break the silence. Valeria, that day at the airport, the young man with you. Vicente, he pauses, unable to finish the question. The weight of the possibility crushes him. He takes a deep breath, knowing that the moment of truth has arrived. Yes, Carlos. Vicente, is your son? The words, they fall between them like a stone, causing emotional shock waves. Carlos feels as if the ground had vanished from under his feet. My son, whispers almost to himself. A mixture of disbelief and joy overwhelms him. Why didn't you tell me? Valeria, look at Carlos's eyes, full of sadness and resolution. At that moment, it seemed like the only option. You were leaving, you had your plans, and I didn't want to make a burden. He explains, his words loaded with painful memories. Carlos shakes his head, struggling to process the news. I would have stayed, says her voice full of remorse. If she had known. They spend the next hours talking, unearthing the past with its joys and sadness. Valeria tells Carlos about Vicente's early years, how she struggled to raise him alone, the nights without sleeping, the first steps, the first words, every detail. It's a blow to Carlos's heart. Every moment he lost, every milestone he couldn't share. I want to know him. I want to be part of his life, Carlos says, determined. It's too late for me. The vulnerability in his voice, it's something that Valeria had never heard before. Valeria looks at Carlos, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. It's not too late, she responds slowly, but we're going to need time. Vicente, he doesn't know about you. He has the right to know, but it needs to be in his time. Carlos nods, understanding the delicacy of the situation. Thank you, Valeria, for this opportunity, says, gratitude overflowing in her words. After meeting Valeria, Carlos finds himself immersed in an emotional storm driving back home, but his mind is somewhere else, trapped in the revelations of the day. The idea of having a son, Vicente, a young man who grew up without his presence, is a reality that he struggles to accept at every traffic light and every curve. Carlos is harassed by the weight of his past choices. When he arrives home, he barely perceives his family surroundings around him. He heads straight to his small study, a space full of memories of a simpler time before his decisions took him away from Valeria. Sitting at the desk, holding his head in his hands, trying to make sense of the things. Conflicting feelings that consume him as I could, he mutters to himself, a mixture of anger and desperation in his voice. How could I not know the guilt for having left Valeria, for having been an absence in his son's life? Hits him hard. Remembers the words of Valeria fought alone, and her heart tightens. Carlos spends the night awake, reliving moments from the past and imagining all the moments he lost with Vicente. He thinks about Vicente's first words, his first steps, his achievements and challenges, all without him. The pain of that realization is almost unbearable. At dawn, Carlos decides that he needs to do something, anything to begin to repair the damage caused. He knows that the road ahead will be difficult, but he also knows that he cannot give up now that he knows of Vicente's existence. I need to be a part of his life. Somehow he decides, a feeling of determination growing inside him. In the following days, Carlos dedicates himself to learning everything he can about being a father, reads books, watches videos, and even seek advice from friends who have children. Each new piece of information is a reminder of lost time, but also a step towards the future that he hopes to build with Vicente. At a certain point, Carlos finds, looking at an old photograph of Valeria, a memory of a time before everything changed. Valeria, I'm so sorry, he murmurs quietly, almost as if he hoped she could hear him. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. Carlos contacts Valeria again, expressing his desire to get involved in her life. Vicente in any way she considers appropriate. She proposes gradual meetings respecting Vicente's feelings and space. Carlos was anxiously awaiting Valeria's response, waiting for any sign that she would allow him to be part of Vicente's life. When the phone finally rang, he answered the first one. Ring with his heart beating fast. However, what Valeria had to say was not at all what he expected. With a weak voice that Carlos barely recognized, Valeria shared news that they left him paralyzed. He was seriously ill. The seriousness in his voice and the pause full of emotion between his words left Carlos breathless. I don't know how much time I have left, Carlos confessed, his words full of deep sadness. Carlos's initial shock quickly transformed into determination. The guilt and remorse he had felt from years of absence now mixed with a resurgence of the love he had always felt for Valeria, a love that had never completely disappeared. You need the best treatment, Valeria. Please let me help you, he implored, his voice firm despite the emotion that threatened to overflow. Valeria hesitated, accustomed to facing life and its challenges alone. But the sincerity in Carlos's offer and the concern in his voice broke the barriers that she had built over the years. Carlos, I don't know what to say, she murmured, moved by the offer. Let me take you to New York, Carlos insisted. There we can find the best doctors, the best treatments. It's not just for you, Valeria. It's also because Vicente shouldn't lose her mother. As soon as the mention of Vicente made Valeria finally get around to the idea of leaving her son so early, it terrified her more than the illness itself. Okay, Carlos, I accept your help, she said with a mixture of relief and fear in her voice. In the following days, Carlos took all the necessary measures, arranging the best medical treatment money could buy, contacted specialists, scheduled appointments, and made sure Valeria received priority attention. As soon as they arrived in New York, when the day of the trip arrived, Carlos met Valeria and Vicente at the airport. Vicente, who had been informed about his mother's condition, looked at Carlos with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Carlos approached the young man, offering an encouraging smile. Let's take care of your mother together, he said, putting a hand on Vicente's shoulder. The trip to New York was calm but full of tension and expectation. Valeria, although we seemed fragile on her part, she was determined to do everything in his power to help, motivated not only by guilt but by a genuine desire to repair the mistakes of the past and offer Valeria and Vicente the hope of a better future. Upon arriving in New York, Valeria was admitted immediately in one of the best medical centers in the city. Carlos remained by her side, being a pillar of support as she began treatment. Despite how challenging the situation was, there was an undeniable feeling that they were in this together. Fight, a family united by adversity. hope, and above all love that against all expectations had withstood the test of time. The arrival in New York marked the beginning of a tumultuous journey of emotions for Valeria, Carlos, and Vicente. While Valeria began her treatment in the renowned medical center, tension and uncertainty floated in the air, a cloud of fear and hope mixed together. In the first days, Carlos and Vicente frequently met in the hospital corridors. Their conversations initially marked by an awkward silence. Vicente, grateful for Carlos' support of his mother, was still cautiously trying to understand the role of this stranger who had suddenly become a constant presence in their lives. However, as the days passed, the unexpected situation began to weave improbable bonds between father and son. Carlos shared stories from his own life, including the mistakes he had made and the lessons that Vicente had learned. For his part, began to open up by sharing his passions, his fears, and his dreams for the future. Between visits to Valeria's hospital and coffees drunk quickly in the cafeteria, a connection was beginning to form, timid and hesitant but genuine. It was during one of those conversations that the news came that the doctors had completed a thorough review of Valeria's diagnosis. Carlos and Vicente received the information together side by side. When the doctor entered the waiting room with a visibly lighter expression, "I have good news," the doctor began with a cautious smile on his face. After a detailed review of Valeria's examinations and a series of additional tests, we discovered that there was an error in the initial diagnosis. "Her condition is serious, but contrary to what was previously reported, it is treatable." The doctor's words fell on Carlos and Vicente like a refreshing rain after a long drought. A mixture of relief and disbelief enveloped them, and for a moment neither of them could speak. Then almost they simultaneously looked at each other, a smile shining on their faces, a reflection of the renewed hope that now filled their hearts. In the following days, as Valeria continued the treatment, the dynamic between her, Carlos, and Vicente began to change. The initial desperation was replaced by a cautious hope, a hope that grew stronger with each advance in Valeria's treatment. Carlos was by her side every step of the way, offering unwavering support, as Vicente found comfort in the presence of her father, a man she was just beginning to know, but whom she was already beginning to respect and perhaps love. Valeria's illness, which initially seemed to be a farewell sentence, became a catalyst for the healing of old wounds and the strengthening of family ties. Long worn out while Valeria fought for her health, Carlos and Vicente fought at her side, no longer as strangers, but as a family united by adversity and the hope of better days. As Valeria's treatment progressed, anew chapter unfolded in the family's life, marked by the blossoming of a previously unthinkable relationship between Carlos and Vicente. The adversity that had initially brought them together under gloomy circumstances now wove bonds of understanding and affection between them. Carlos, determined to make up for lost time, made an effort for including Vicente in his life, sharing not only stories and life lessons, but also simple moments of everyday life. They explored the city together in the intervals of Valeria's treatment, visiting museums, parks, and places that Carlos had known since his youth. These seemingly ordinary moments became special cornerstones in the construction of their relationship. Vicente, at first hesitant, began to see Carlos in a new light, the constant presence, the genuine interest in his life and his interests. Carlos's dreams and willingness to really listening made the young man little by little open his heart to his father. He began to share more about his school, his friends, and even his parents. Deeper thoughts, things that he previously kept only to himself or shared with Valeria. Valeria, for her part, watched the development of that relationship with mixed feelings. There was a sweetness in the way her son and Carlos interacted, a reminder of what could have been if the circumstances were different. Each shared laugh, each look of mutual understanding between father and son filled his heart with joy, but also with deep sadness for the time Carlos had spent lost with Vicente, years that could never be recovered. In her sleepless nights, when the silence of the hospital room became almost deafening, Valeria reflected on the course of her life, thinking about how, despite all the difficulties, she had managed to raise an incredible son, who now she had the opportunity to build a relationship with her father. It was an unexpected gift, a ray of light in the midst of the storm they faced together. The treatment continued, and with each passing day, Valeria saw Carlos and Vicente more united, an invisible bond strengthening between them. This new dynamic brought a feeling of fulfillment that she had not felt in a long time, a feeling that despite everything her family was finally finding their union. Valeria shared her observations with Carlos in moments of tranquility, expressing her gratitude for her presence. Not only for her but for Vicente. Carlos, for his part, he acknowledged the lost time but also committed to making the future different. "We are in this together," he said, holding Valeria's hand like a family. And so as Valeria fought for her health, a new hope arose, not only for her recovery, but for the rebuilding of a family that against all odds found their way back to each other. As the Valeria's treatment was progressing, the positive results were beginning to manifest, bringing relief and joy to each member of the family. The news of her complete recovery came like a breath of new life, dispelling the shadows of fear and uncertainty that they had settled in their hearts. The possibility of a future together, previously tenuous and distant, now becoming vibrant and full of promise. With Valeria's health restored, the family found themselves in a moment of rediscovery and reconnection. Carlos, Valeria, and Vicente began to explore the meaning to be truly reunited, not only by Valeria's condition that had brought them together in New York, but as a family united by bonds of love, forgiveness, and understanding. The return to everyday life brought with it the opportunity to create new memories together. Carlos, eager to make up for lost time, organized walks and activities that they could enjoy as a family. Whether it was a simple picnic in the park, a visit to a museum, or a game night at home, every moment was valued and celebrated. Valeria watched the transformation in her family with a heart full of gratitude. Seeing Carlos and Vicente together laughing and sharing stories healed a part of her that had been hurt for a long time. There were still moments of sadness, reflections of years of pain and loneliness, but now those feelings were accompanied by a feeling of hope and happiness. Vicente, who had grown up in the shadow of the mystery over his father, was in a process of adjusting to the new reality. The constant presence of Carlos in his life, once a source of confusion and caution, had become a reason for joy and security. "I was beginning to understand the meaning of having a father, not only in theory but in the daily practice of care, attention, and unconditional love." In the midst of this phase of healing and rediscovery, the family also faced the challenges of dealing with the secrets and silence that had marked their separation. Difficult conversations were held, revealing old pains and misunderstandings that needed to be addressed. Carlos and Valeria in particular spent time talking about the past, expressing repentance and forgiving each other. Who had taken these moments of vulnerability and honesty further strengthened the bond between them, allowing old feelings to heal wounds and build a solid foundation for the future. Open communication became the key to overcoming obstacles, helping them better understand themselves and others as the family navigated this new phase of their lives. It was clear that although the scars of the past, they would never disappear completely. The strength of love and forgiveness they shared was powerful enough to overcome any adversity together. They began to glimpse a future full of possibilities, united not only by the blood but by a conscious choice to be together to heal and love. Valeria's recovery not only brought a renewal of health, but also the opportunity to enter truths that had been hidden for a long time. With the family now on a path of reunion and healing, Valeria knew it was time to reveal to Vicente the whole truth about her father. This decision, full of anxiety and esperanza, marked one of the most significant moments in the family's trip. On a quiet afternoon, with the golden rays of the sun gently filtering through the living room window, Valeria called Vicente to sit with her. Carlos, aware of what was about to happen, gave them space but remained close enough to offer support. "Vicente," began Valeria, her voice trembling with emotion, "there is something very important about what we need to talk about." "Your father?" Vicente looked at his mother, feeling a lump in his throat. He had always known this day would come, but facing reality now seemed terrifyingly final. Valeria continued, choosing his words carefully but with an honesty that left no room for doubt. He told Vicente about his relationship with Carlos, about the circumstances that separated them, and the most crucial thing about Carlos' decision not to be part of Vicente's life at that time. He explained how the reunion in New York had changed everything, how Carlos desperately wanted to correct the mistakes of the past and build a relationship with Vicente. Vicente listened in silence to Valeria's every word, the revelation that Carlos weighed on his shoulders Man who had tried so hard to connect with him was his real father left Vicente, stunned. A complex mix of emotions overwhelmed him: anger at Carlos's absence, relief at the truth finally revealed, and deep confusion about what that meant for his identity. After the conversation Vicente he walked away. Needing time and space to process the enormity of the revelation, he walked aimlessly through the streets of New York, each step echoing with his mother's words. The city around him seemed indifferent to him. Internal crisis, a metaphor for his struggle to find his place in a world that suddenly seemed very different. Carlos, for his part, waited anxiously at home, tortured by the uncertainty about how Vicente would receive the news. When Vicente finally returned, the two looked at each other in a charged silence. Carlos took the first step, approaching cautiously. Vicente, I know this is difficult and I know I made mistakes, but I am here now, and I want to be part of your life if you allow me. Vicente, struggling to maintain his composure. He nodded his head, unable to articulate a response. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: the truth about his past had been revealed, and with it the possibility of building something new in the coming days. Vicente gradually began to accept Carlos as his father, not without moments of tension and hesitation. The revelation had triggered an identity crisis, but also opened the door to a deeper understanding between father and son as they worked together to overcome the barriers of the past. Valeria watched, feeling relief mixed with a touch of sadness for all that had been lost and now found itself as autumn unfolded over the city, bringing with it the rustling of leaves and the promise of new beginnings. The family formed by Carlos, Valeria, and Vicente was on the brink of a new era. The challenges of becoming a united family, despite the scars of the past, were palpable, but there was a shared determination to face them together. Carlos, in particular, felt the weight of responsibility for guiding this transition, had spent months reflecting on his past actions and missed opportunities. Now, with Valeria recovered and a developing relationship with Vicente, he wanted more than redemption. He craved a complete renewal of the ties that had once been broken. On a bright afternoon, by the golden light of the setting sun, Carlos took Valeria to one of his favorite places in the city, a quiet park overlooking the river where the beauty of twilight was reflected in the serene waters. Was the perfect setting for the moment that Carlos had planned, a moment that he hoped would mark the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. Valeria, began Carlos, his voice charged with emotion, these last few months have been a journey of discovery and redemption for you and Vicente, have taught me the true meaning of the family, of forgiveness and love. I know that the wounds of the past do not disappear overnight, but I am committed to doing what is necessary to heal them. Valeria, moved by Carlos's sincere words, she felt her heart beating with a mixture of hope and caution. She watched him, recognizing the depth of his transformation. Then Carlos knelt and held a small but elegant ring. Valeria, I would like to ask you for an opportunity to build a new future together. Only as parents of Vicente, but as colleagues, like a family, would you give me that honor? Carlos' request, although on a certain intuitive level expected by Valeria, it still left her breathless. Tears welled up in her eyes, not only for the proposal but for the journey that both had undertaken to get to that moment. Yes, Carlos responded, his voice a whisper full of emotion. Yes, I want to build that future with you. Valeria's acceptance sealed a commitment, not only between them but also with Vicente, who, although not present at the time, was the invisible link that deeply united them. The road ahead would certainly have its challenges, but Carlos, Valeria, and Vicente now faced the future as a family, united, ready to build a life together full of love, understanding, and above all, this renewed commitment between Carlos and Valeria was not only a symbol of their rekindled love, but also a vow to build a home where Vicente could thrive, surrounded by the unconditional love of both parents. Carlos's proposal and Valeria's acceptance marked the beginning of a new era for the family, an era of hope, healing, and shared happiness. 2 years after the events that brought together Carlos, Valeria, and Vicente, the family was on a sunny spring afternoon celebrating a moment of pure and irrepressible joy. The home they had built together was overflowing with laughter and lively conversations, a vibrant testimony to the journey of healing and love they had undertaken. The reason for the celebration was so miraculous and symbolic: the birth of twins, a boy and a girl who came into the world bringing with them a new wave of hope and joy.